Okay, in this video we are going to look at answer the question, what do the numbers in the periodic table mean? So you will be given in your GCSEs a periodic table that looks like this. It's got a load of numbers in it, and you'll be expected to understand what those numbers mean. So let's have a look at an atom, which we've looked at before, just to remind ourselves what the parts of an atom are. So atoms have a nucleus in the middle that contain protons and neutrons, and they also have electrons going around the nucleus. Protons and neutrons both have a mass of 1. Electrons don't really have any mass at all. Protons have got a positive charge, electrons a negative charge, and neutrons no charge. Now that's important when it comes to understanding what these numbers mean. So let's have a look at 3 examples from the periodic table and see if we can use them to help us understand what the numbers mean: oxygen, boron and aluminium. Let's start with oxygen. Oxygen looks like this. It's got 8 at the bottom, 16 at the top. What do those numbers mean? Well, first of all, the 8 is pretty straightforward. When you get the periodic table in your exam, it will tell you that the bottom number is the atomic bracket proton number, and that's a pretty good clue about what it's telling you. It's telling you the number of protons. So oxygen has 8 protons, and it's easy to work out because you just look at the number at the bottom. But we can also work out the number of electrons and the number of neutrons from the table as well. So protons have a charge of +1, and if oxygen has 8 protons, then at the moment oxygen has a charge of +8 based on what we know. It's got 8 protons, so it's +8. But every atom has no charge overall. So if oxygen has got a charge of +8 from the protons, it also needs a charge of -8 from the electrons. Now, if each electron has a charge of -1, we're going to need 8 electrons to balance the 8 protons. So, oxygen also has 8 electrons, and it's always the case that every atom has the same number of protons and electrons because atoms don't have a charge overall. Finally, what about this number at the top? In your exam, in the periodic table, it will tell you it's the relative atomic mass, 16 in this case. But what does that mean? Well, again, we know that protons have a mass of 1. So if we have 8 protons, then the mass of the protons in the atom is 8. But where does the rest of the mass come from? Maybe it comes from the electrons. But remember, electrons have hardly any mass. They don't really change the mass of the atom at all. So we're still stuck on 8. If you look, neutrons also have a mass of 1. So the difference between the mass from the protons of 8 and the mass of the whole atom must be caused by the number of neutrons. So we can work this out by doing the mass, take away the number of protons, must tell us the number of neutrons. And this is always how we can work out the number of neutrons. To put it simply, top take away bottom equals the number of neutrons. So in this case, 8. So if you look at this, we've got 8 protons, 8 electrons, 8 neutrons. And maybe you think, well, does every atom have the same number of protons, neutrons and electrons? So let's have a look at boron. Boron has the numbers 5 and 11, and so we know that boron has 5 protons because its proton number is 5. Atoms always have a balanced charge, no charge overall, so if there are 5 protons, there have to be 5 electrons as well. But boron has a mass of 11. Now if it has a mass of 11, and we do what we did before, which is we say the mass, take away the mass of the protons, which was 5, so if we do 11 take away 5, we get 6. So we can see in this case boron has 6 neutrons, which is obviously different to the number of protons and electrons. So this answers the simple part of the question, what do the numbers in the periodic table mean? But I just want to spend the next minute or so explaining what happens if we play with the numbers a bit. So what happens if we give boron one more proton? Would it look like this? Obviously the atomic number has to go up because we've given it one more proton, and the mass also has to go up by 1 because we have added a proton with mass as well. So is that what we form? No. When we give an atom an extra proton, it becomes a new element. Every atom in the universe with 5 protons is boron, and every atom in the universe with 6 protons is carbon. So any time that an element gains a proton or loses a proton, it becomes a new element. What about if boron gets one more neutron? So again, here's boron as you would find it in the periodic table, and here it would be if it forms an isotope. It's still got 5 at the bottom because the number of protons haven't changed, but we've given it an extra neutron. And I think I just told you, we call this an isotope. It is possible sometimes for atoms to have a different number of neutrons. In this case, we've given boron one more. And when atoms have a different number of neutrons, it's called an isotope. It doesn't really change their chemical properties, but that's what it is. I'm going to do a separate video on what an isotope is. Finally, what happens if boron gets one more electron? So here is boron as it is, and if we add an electron, the numbers are going to stay the same. We still have 5 protons, we still have 6 neutrons, so the mass stays at 11. Well, you may remember I said it's impossible for an atom to have charge, because when an atom has charge, it becomes an ion. Now if we give boron an extra electron, it has 5 positive protons and 6 negative electrons, so it has become charged overall. And a charged atom we call an ion. So, how do you work out the number of protons, neutrons and electrons? Well, the bottom number is the protons, so aluminium has 13 protons. It is also the number of electrons because the protons and the electrons have to be balanced in an atom. And if we want to work out the number of neutrons, we do the mass of the atom, take away the mass of the protons, which equals 14. It's always worth having a little practice to check that you can actually do it. So here's a question for you. How many protons, neutrons and electrons does lead have? Question mark. Sorry for leaving that out. Pause the video, try and work it out, and I'll put the answer up in a second. There it is. Lead has 82 protons, 82 electrons and 125 neutrons. Up next, you might like to learn how to calculate relative atomic mass, so check out my video on that. But for now, don't stop believing.